The following podcast is a deep, shallow dive production.
And you're gonna love it.
Okay, let's go.
Don't let anyone talk you out of your humanity. I'm Dr. Mimi Syed, board-certified emergency medicine physician from the U.S. I recently returned from my second medical mission in Gaza. Shooting children in the head, in the chest, deliberately is wrong. The Israeli military has long been targeting children. All of my colleagues who have served in Gaza have seen children arrive in the hospital with bullets. I don't understand how shooting children deliberately is justified. I don't understand when enough will be enough. If you are a healthcare worker, please say something. In January 2025, 6 children alone have been shot in the West Bank by snipers. 1 child was shot dead in Rafah after the ceasefire agreement. When will it be enough? I don't understand. If you are a parent, how could you not say something? If you are an American taxpayer, how could you not say something? If you are a human being, how do you not say something? For God's sake, please don't keep burying your head in the sand. We have to all stand up for what is right. Don't let anyone convince you that it is okay or it is justified to deliberately shoot children. It is never okay. It doesn't matter what religion you belong to. It doesn't matter what politics you belong to. None of that matters. Humanity is what matters. Shooting children, deliberately targeting them, is wrong.
All right, so I wanted to start out playing that clip because honestly, not only was that such a powerful clip, but that is how I discovered you. And I remixed that clip on Instagram, and then you were kind enough to reach out and say thank you. And that brings us here. And honestly, all right, everybody, this is probably one of the interviews that I personally have been most looking forward to. But we've got Dr. Mimi Syed here, and what'd you just get back from?
I just got back from Sarajevo a week ago, where I did my testimony.
You know what, then? Tell us about the testimony. Let's start there. Who were you in front of?
So it was for the Gaza Tribunal, and it was essentially people from various backgrounds, but 2 of us were medical doctors who had been to Gaza. And we just testified what we saw, what we witnessed, who we took care of, the types of injuries, the injustices. And, the idea is just like any tribunal is to kind of collect the evidence for the future and, to stop this, essentially.
Wow. Okay. All right. So, part of today obviously is to talk about the horrors that you've seen, because obviously you were there firsthand and you saw it. And I think it hits a lot harder coming directly from you versus us seeing it on our phones. But, I want to talk about the bigger picture of all of this. And I don't want this to be just another very sad take on things, because it is a very sad take on things. But, I think there's larger implications with all of this, and there's larger implications that, affect the United Nations, affect really global policy between these big Western powers. What are your thoughts on that? Let's start with the important big picture of what this really means.
Yeah, I think that all of us healthcare workers have gone in, and then we come back and we tell our stories of who we treated, the types of injuries we treated, the people we treated, which is essentially children, right? Half of Gaza's population is children. They're children. And I remember, tallying up my numbers, and I think I treated like 86% children, small children, younger than 12 years old. And we want to tell these stories and we want to share this with the world. But I think that, in doing that, there are implications and there is a call to make larger conclusions based on what we're saying. Because we can share our stories all we want, but there has to be a change when we're doing that. And I think that's the hope that all of us have, is we tell these stories with the understanding that someone will listen and do something about this. And the implications are that there has to be a stop to arms to Israel. That just has to happen. And the biggest entity is the US. The US needs to stop blindly supporting Israeli government. There has to be sanctions placed on Israel. And these empty threats that are coming out of all of these large bodies, the UN included, unfortunately. There are these threats to put sanctions on, these threats to do Israel, but nobody really does anything. They just kind of say, oh, well, this is bad. We know this is bad. This is a genocide, but we don't want to actually do anything about it. And that's the sad part about it is it has to stop. Someone has to take a stand and do something.
Yeah, I think that is exactly the case. And, you know, during whether it's the Biden administration or the Trump administration, it's just been a bunch of lip service. And I will say, and I've said this on the podcast, I think the Biden Harris playbook was good cop, bad cop. And it was to come on the air, say a bunch of, Biden calling Netanyahu an asshole, supposedly, but like, that's all just lip service. That's all for the cameras, I feel like, because at the same time, he would continue to fund them. He would continue to arm them. Trump, same thing here over the past couple weeks. All of the sudden, there's all the stories about how Trump is cutting ties with Netanyahu. There's a rift between the two. Is the bromance over? And then at the same time, nothing's happening. Another $100 million is getting sent over there. So I think that people need to, and they have woken up a little bit to, the nonsense of that. The walk needs to match the talk. So I'm glad that is something that you guys are helping to bring forward. When you were at that tribunal or even during your time in Gaza, I mean, is anyone listening to you? Are you able to interact with anyone of power at the United Nations, at UNRWA? Does anybody even give a shit? Like, it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, it's very frustrating. When I returned, a small group of us actually went to DC to talk to a congressman. We after that, four of us went to the United Nations in New York and actually met with the Secretary General. And so, I don't know how much higher you go from there, as far as we're concerned. But it just seems like it just falls on deaf ears. And there's this, oh, this is terrible. Yes, this is happening to children. And it needs to stop. But then there's nothing to match that with action. And so I think that's where most of the frustration lies, that this continues to happen. And we keep telling our stories. We keep yelling into a void and nobody's listening.
Yeah, yeah. I think the same thing applies for like the ICC and the ICJ and all of that. You had that guy Kareem Khan. I forget his role, but there's arrest warrants that are issued for Netanyahu and the former defense minister Yoav Gallant, and nothing happens. It's just constant noise. And I'll tell you what's frustrating. You said you guys met with the Secretary General of the UN. Is I don't know if he's a Hispanic guy or something. I'm blanking on his name.
Secretary Guterres, yeah.
Okay, okay. Like, do you feel like that guy is really trying and just has no power? Or, because I will tell you another narrative that actually it's not a narrative, another line of thinking that's really taken a foothold on the internet and on Instagram in particular is that, even like that Guterres guy, like, is he in on this? Is Kareem Khan in on this? Are all these guys just Zionist puppets that are placed in those positions to, bark a lot, but at the end of the day, they're really not going to do anything? Did you get the vibe from Guterres that he really cares and wants to actually make change?
We did actually. He immediately tweeted out, and that's the big platform is that there needs to be an emergent kind of medical evacuation for 2,500 children. I mean, it was literally within an hour after meeting with us. And that was the big focus that we had was medical evacuations, specifically for children. And so I think that, everyone has good intentions and they want to see this change, but no one is willing to actually pull the trigger and do something solid to make it stop. And what the reasoning is behind that, there's a lot of reasons I can imagine, but it's there. A lot of it is fear as well. And, where does money come from? I guess if you don't understand something, right, they say follow the money. And so,
Right, right.
But yeah, and I don't claim to be an expert on any of those things, but I do see that there is a lack of action. France condemns Israel's actions and then turns around and supplies machine guns. So it just doesn't, it contradicts the things that they're saying, unfortunately.
No, I think you're totally right. And I think that that facade of being mad and, like I said, that facade of Biden calling Netanyahu an asshole and Trump saying, I'm whatever with Netanyahu, in front of the camera, and then what's really happening behind the scenes. People are calling that out now, and people are everybody's had enough. It has been 18 months of literally watching this scroll on our phones, and I think it's gotten to the point where enough is enough. And I will tell you personally, what I've talked a lot about is, the tipping point is going to be when base Republicans say enough is enough. And when that happens, I think we're going to see change, because unfortunately, I don't think this administration cares what liberals think. I don't think they care what anyone else really besides their base thinks. So anyway, okay, well, that's good news that you felt like the Secretary General of the UN was listening. When you guys went to Washington, D.C., what about any congressmen? Like, was there any congressmen that really seemed like they were wanting to champion this cause?
I mean, we met with, and I'll speak about myself personally. I was in a small group, but I met only with like interns for that office. We never met
Wow.
with any senior officials. And, we had a type of press conference where we presented our cases, like the little girl with the bullet in her head, Mira. And there was no turnout, and so, and even the people we did speak to, there was, skepticism. I was met with skepticism or questioning whether it was authentic. So it was, and I've never done DC advocacy work for any medical reasons in the past. And so it seemed futile. That's all,
Yeah.
how I can describe it. It fell on deaf ears again. But yeah, and that was right when Trump came into office. So.
Okay. Especially if they had you guys meet with interns. That's just crazy. Unfortunately, when it comes to Congress, I mean, the entire Republican Party is very aligned with Israel. They're very pro-Israel. I think the roots of that have to do with the Christian and then Christian Zionism that exists in the United States. The baby boomer generation is so bought into the Old Testament and the Bible and having to support Israel because of biblical reasons and biblical prophecies that, the Republican Party, it's really just this Thomas Massey guy that's been standing up. On the Democrat side, you do have a few people. There's a guy, I think his name is Chris Van Holland. I forget what state he's from, but it's a real shame that medical doctors and professionals like yourself that, quite frankly, are duly respected every other time they talk or do something. Now, when it's in regards to this situation, I mean, that should not fall on deaf ears. That's really a travesty. That's an absolute travesty.
Yeah, I mean, is it just Republicans? I don't think so. The Democrats were also very heavily involved in this, and this is one of the only issues that they agree on. This blind support for Israel.
No,
And
you're right. You're
unfortunately,
right.
and you had Matt Miller just the other day admit that Israel's committed war crimes. Where was that when this was actually happening? Where were those statements when this was actually happening? So there's no question, right? There's no question whether Israel's committed war crimes. But what are we going to do about it now?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Can we talk a little bit about, I want to just spend a moment focusing on what was it that made you decide, hey, you know what? I want to go over there and I want to do something to help. And then how did you even do that? Like how does that even happen?
Yeah, I think I was kind of scrolling and looking at this live stream, these atrocities, especially the disproportionality of the children that were being affected by this, and just like the horrendous images coming out of decapitated babies or limbless babies and pulled out of the rubble and things like that. And I, came to learn that a lot of the senior medical staff had been either killed or imprisoned. And I was seeing these things and, thinking to myself, well, this is my skill set. And so I decided, I have to go. And there was a time where I just couldn't just sit there and watch it. I had to be able to kind of go and show my solidarity, but also help whoever I can. And also for the healthcare workers, who had been doing this already at that time that I went, already almost a year, day in and day out. So and it's coordinated by WHO and the UN, and you go with an NGO, and then you get approval by the Israeli government whether you can enter or not. Essentially, like 12 hours before you enter, they say whether you can go in or not. But it's through Jordan. The Rafah border is closed now. So before, early on in this, many of my colleagues went through Rafah. And they were able to take, things with them, medical supplies and such. But when we go through Jordan and we have to go through Kerem Shalom, which is the checkpoint into Gaza, you're completely restricted on what you can take in. Even the amount of cash that you can take in is restricted. The number of phones you have is restricted. The laptop or medical supplies, just things you need for your own practice, you can't take in. So it has to be strictly personal use. Nothing that can be deemed as like distributable or anything like that. Even food, like there's a limit to how much food you can take. It's very kind of sadistic and meant to intimidate and harass and prevent you from coming back or wanting to go.
Oh, that is crazy. What about like your medical bag? Like, did you take a bunch of, your stethoscope or like your medical supplies? Or did they have them there?
No, there's nothing there. And I had one stethoscope that of course I gave away when I was there. But if you brought 5 stethoscopes, for example, high chance they'll take it away from you. I brought disposable laryngoscopes with me, which are these small handheld devices that kind of fit in the palm of your hand. There's different sizes for adults, different for children, but it's like the first step in saving a person's life, right? The airway. And I had to smuggle one in. I smuggled one for an adult size and one for a small child. And I used those for like 50 times. They're disposable. They're not supposed to be reused, but I had to reuse because they don't have them there. And I wasn't allowed to bring, more than one or two in. But they also, if they saw that, they would have taken it from me. So I had to smuggle it under my clothes and hide it. But both times that I went, I had to do that, and I used it, and I saved children's lives. But what if I couldn't bring that in? So it's just, there's no reason to not allow it in. It's a small device. There's nothing dangerous about it. There's nothing you can do with it. But it's, these are the kind of things that happen at the checkpoint when medical workers try to enter. First of all, they sometimes can get denied at the very last minute. So if you just think of it from a practical point of view, we have to take time off from work. We have to make arrangements with our families. Myself, I have 3 small kids. I have to make sure I have the proper childcare. My husband's, able to do his work. So all of those things are difficult to make arrangements for. But when you get there and you're denied, or you're told, okay, try again next week, that just delays everything. And then coming back out of Gaza, you can get denied exit. So that delays
Wow.
you further from your job, from returning in your home. So it just discourages. It's like this systematic, this way of it, discouraging people from coming in and helping. And you get harassed. You have a gun pointed at you the entire time, when you're putting your bags on the conveyor belt. And we're physicians. Like, what possible threat could we pose to anybody? So it's these type of kind of petty things that you see that actually, sometimes can discourage people from entering.
I'm sure. Did you have I don't even know if I want to ask, but was there security with you? These NGOs that you, I guess, went there through, or whether it was the World Health Organization or whatever group, did they provide even like a point person, or are you guys kind of on your own?
Yeah, you are with a person from the UN. WHO just coordinates your efforts to get in, but then the UN, there's a convoy. So you sit in this armored car, and there's like 8 of them. When I went, there was about 8 of them, and there's like 4 people in each car, and it's armored. It's bulletproof or whatnot. Obviously, it doesn't protect you from an airstrike or a bomb, but if
Yeah.
a bullet were to hit you or something, and those efforts are very difficult too, because they have to, at every few, like a mile or what, or even less, but they have to get a green light every time they pass a certain point. So it takes forever to get in. It's like a 12-hour day when it really could have been done in like a few hours. You could be inside Gaza, but it's this long kind of back and forth to, exhaust you and just
I'm
discourage the whole
sure. I'm
process.
sure. I had a former US Marine on a few episodes ago, and he went into actually the West Bank, which should have been a lot easier. And he talked about that exact same thing. He said, the entire system is set up to, first of all, completely annoy and pester the Palestinian population. And then anyone else that's coming in, they want to make it so difficult and so uncomfortable, really uncomfortable, that, you just decide, okay, I can't do this. And by the way,
Yeah.
that is just incredible that you took time not only away from your work, but you took time from your family, your husband, your 3 kids to do something. And then there are people that, don't even have time to look at a social media post because they'd rather post something about their food. Like, that is just insane to me. So I just wanted to tell you how much I respect everything about you, but the fact that I didn't know you had 3 small kids, and I didn't know you were married. And so you're taking time away from your family to have done this. I mean, that is just unbelievable to me. Oh my God. I have so many things I want to ask you, but I want to really talk about the important stuff. I've noticed in one of as I look through your Instagram and follow you there was a little girl, and I think you mentioned her name. Was it Mimi that got a bullet in her
Mira.
head? Mira. Okay. Can you just tell us that situation, and then maybe, yeah, let's start there. Can you just talk us through that?
Yeah, and actually, Fault Lines for Al Jazeera, it's called Kids Under Fire. It's actually a small film that they did. It features
Right.
her and focuses on children that are shot in the head, essentially. And it was a bunch of us doctors that were interviewed for this. But Mira was a little girl who was 4 years old, and it was during my first mission to Gaza when I was at Nasser Hospital. She came in during a mass casualty incident, and during that time there's just so many mass casualty incidents, like every single day, multiple times a day. But she was carried in by her father, and her mother was there too. And she had blood all over her face. She had a single wound to her head. And she was, because of the lack of resources and the terrible prognosis of open head injuries, she was marked to just let her die, essentially, because there's not much to offer someone who has an open head injury. But with that same laryngoscope that I had that I just talked about, I was able to kind of secure her airway and stabilize her. And I remembered I had a neurosurgeon on the mission with me. I remember running upstairs, like 4 flights of stairs, and I just like tugged him and said, "Let's go. You need to look at this girl." And it turned out she had a bullet in her head. She was shot by, reported by quadcopters in the area, which, from what I understand, they have shooting capability. But she miraculously survived. She's doing pretty well considering she does need ongoing medical care. And then after March 18th, after the ceasefire was completely violated by the Israeli military, she's now again in a terrible situation. Her mother sustained an amputation to her leg on top of that after I returned. And so it's just and she's like one of thousands, right? And there are so many kids that have been shot by these either snipers or quadcopters, whatever it is, that they didn't make it. They died. They couldn't make it to the CT scan. And I have so many images, documentation of children that I saw during that time that came in with gunshots to the head, the chest, the neck, those type of things. But she's just one of thousands. And that film is actually, I think every American taxpayer should watch that film, because it not only does it cover the things that we saw as American physicians, but it also covers the kind of the US government aspect of it. They interview former US officials and talk about the Leahy Law, which is extremely important in this. So I encourage everybody to watch that.
Yeah, I'll make sure I put a link of that. I'm gonna watch it myself. So with Mira, were you guys able to get the bullet out of her head?
Yeah, they wait for the swelling to come down, but eventually it was taken out of her head. And she has something called a VP shunt, which, kind of prevents like accumulation of the spinal fluid. But it's something that she needs ongoing care for. She can't just, the situation in Gaza is terrible. She gets repeated infections still. She needs a very intensive rehab because she's got a deficit on her left side. She's going to need revisions to this shunt that she has in her head. So there's just so much care that goes into that. But, in this country, she would be fine. She'd thrive. she'd have a normal life. But every single day, her life is threatened with everything, not just a bomb dropping on her again, but getting shot again, or having an infection, or
Yeah.
being starved to death, because that's what's happening now. There hasn't been any aid entering since March 2nd, and there's no food. Even now, we can talk about the aid, the humanitarian funding, or the aid that's supposed to be coming in, but that's essentially just a complete failure, as we've seen in the past few days.
No, I feel like all of the humanitarian efforts, especially, I think one of the efforts now is supposedly a US led effort, but then the head of
Yeah.
it is an Israeli, I don't know if it's a former IDF, I might be getting that wrong, but like then the civilians and the citizens are going toward the food areas, and then they're being picked off by snipers and they're being shot at while they're trying to get their humanitarian aid. That is
Yeah, well, here's the thing. If you let drops of aid into a place where people are essentially starving to death, and they have been for a very long time, you are going to create a situation where people are going to loot, and they're going to try to get the food very quick. I mean, any human being that I impose starvation on and threaten their children, and try to kill their children, they're going to become desperate. That's a normal human response. As a mother,
absolutely.
I guarantee you I will do anything in my power to save my children. That's a fact. That doesn't make me a bad person. That doesn't make me a criminal. That makes me a human being. And so I think these are all methods that the Israeli government, this is all part of that propaganda to make them look like, dehumanized Palestinians, which is exactly what they're doing. You have looters, or you have people trying to get aid to try to basically get whatever they can get their hands on. And then they turn around and say, "Oh, well, look at these animals. Look at
No,
this is
you're
what they do."
absolutely right. I mean, during Black Friday, when Walmart runs a $197 TV, and then there's like storming, people either get trampled to death or whatever. That's for a Black Friday television. I think you make
Right.
an incredible point when you say, imagine being starved, being bombed, being your life has been completely turned upside down. And when there is the possibility of getting some food and getting some aid, of course it's going to be a free for all. Of course it's going to be, pandemonium. And then that gets spun as, look at these animals, or that gets spun as, here's Hamas looting the food and doing all this. It is unfortunately, it's a master class in propaganda, and it's a master class in absolute narrative creation that, thank God for Instagram and TikTok, in the sense that if these platforms didn't exist, nobody would know any of this that's going on. And, either the entire Palestinian people would already be genocided and gone, or again, nobody would be the wiser with, what has been taking place. Last question on Mira. How old was Mira?
She was 4 at the time. She's since turned
She
5.
was 4. Oh my God. Okay, you know what? I want everybody right now who is listening to this, if you have a child, or if you have a niece and nephew, or if you have a grandchild, picture your 4-year-old going through what this poor child has gone through. And if that doesn't put it in perspective for you, I quite frankly don't know what does. I mean, I can't even fathom. I didn't know she was that young. That makes it unbelievable. To talk to us about I mean, I see so many images of the children with amputated legs, amputated arms. I mean, how do you even deal with that when you're there? Like it's
Yeah, I
just
mean,
so
Gaza
heavy.
has the highest number of child amputees in the world. It's the highest number, biggest community of amputees. And they're not just single amputees. These are multi-limb amputees. And it's unprecedented. Everywhere you look, you'll meet a child with an amputation. And that's just children, of course, the adults, the civilians that have amputations. And this is just to kind of set the scene. So, because you can't really appreciate certain things from pictures and videos, you can't appreciate it until you actually go and see. But the roads are completely destroyed. right? There's just rubble and just the logistics of getting from one place to another. So you have an amputee that has to go through rubble and unsafe ground. It's impossible to function in daily life, right? Here, if there's an amputee from some atrocious event, from some tragic event, you can get a prosthetic limb, you get rehabilitation, you have infection prevention, you got antibiotics to take care of it, you have pain medications to help with the surgeries. You have none of that there. And so you haven't just given someone an amputation to their limb, you have essentially maimed them for life. And you have prevented any chance of them having a normal life because you've destroyed everything around them. So
Yeah.
it's not just surgery, right? We're physicians, we go there, we help, but we can only do so much. You still have to have an environment where a patient can thrive and recover. You are
Yeah.
now starving this population, systematically starving them. You cannot heal when you're starving. So if you have an amputation, for example, you have a stump, you have the skin needs to heal, the bones need to heal. None of that can happen if you're starving. You don't have the protein in the market that you can eat. And so these are things that we don't appreciate, right? We think, okay, we provided the surgery, we saved a life, but there's so much more that is needed in order for that patient to live. That's just not something you see very often in the media.
No, absolutely. I mean, the process of recovery, the normal person doesn't even understand to think about that process. Like, what about the hospitals? Like, is sepsis just rampant there?
Yes.
Is
Yes.
infection just absolutely rampant?
Yes, and the rate of post-op infections is astronomical. I mean, it wasn't before. It wasn't before. They had a great, rate. But it's you can't prevent it, right? Because you have no sterility. There's flies in the OR. There's flies in wounds. There's all sorts of terrible drug-resistant bacteria. And you don't have the antibiotics to treat it. You don't have clean water. You don't have sanitation. There's no sewage system because it's been destroyed. Many times there's no power. So, for example, in the summer, when the temperatures are so high, you can't preserve even things like insulin if you had it. And so there's just so many levels of destruction, systematic destruction that has happened to the healthcare system, that you've crippled this population for not just now, but for a very long time.
No, this population is crippled for a decade at a minimum, if not even longer. And
For
I
longer.
think
Yeah.
I think that the systematic targeting of the infrastructure was to accomplish exactly that. You talk about the hospitals, the schools, it's the infrastructure. Okay, and that's going to lead me to honestly one of my most important questions that I really want to ask you because you've been there on the ground. You've been in the hospitals. During your entire time there, did you see any Hamas soldiers? Did you see any Hamas militants? Did you treat any Hamas militants? I have to imagine with all the supposed Hamas that's been killed, you guys treated some of the soldiers, right?
Never. Simple answer, never. I haven't even met a colleague of mine that's been there that's seen them. I lived in the hospitals each time, and we were there for 4 weeks at a time at least. We had complete full access to the hospitals. We were working at all hours. We talked to everybody. Never did I see gunmen, soldiers, fighters, weapons, none of those things. It just never happened. Every single person we treated, they were a civilian, and most of them children or women. And even if there were men and there were adults, they came in with their families, with their children. They were not, coming in from the field fighting or anything like that. Then none of that happened. And this whole narrative of, oh, there's Hamas inside the hospital, it's just not true. It's just not true. We would have seen something. We would have heard something,
Yeah,
or none
yeah.
of us did.
That is insane. That is absolutely insane. And I believe you 1,000%. And the fact that you or your colleagues during all of this time never came across any soldier. It is just, oh my God, that is insane. Like if,
Yeah, and just, another point I want to make is, they claim that there are tunnels and things under the hospital, which they've never been able to actually prove. But say there were tunnels or there was anything, or there was a Hamas, undercover or something ridiculous that they claim. Just think about if the shoe was on the other foot, if Hamas like bombed a hospital, in Israel or something, or if somewhere where a soldier was, or if anybody did that. When Russia bombed a hospital in the Ukraine, it was called a war crime. People are outraged globally, and they, said, this is terrible. You cannot do this. This is a war crime. When Israel bombs a hospital in Gaza, it's like a normal day. Well, there was Hamas, so we can get away with anything. It doesn't make sense. It's a double standard. It's very clear that it's a double standard. In no world would it be okay to bomb a hospital with vulnerable patients inside and civilians inside and healthcare workers inside. It's just never okay to do that.
It's never
36
okay to do
hospitals,
that.
every single one of them is bombed.
Did you say 36? So the
there were
36
36
hospitals, and
Yeah.
how many are left? One or two?
There's one in Khan Yunis, and that's partially functioning. That's Nasser Hospital is one of the only hospitals there now, and that has like a CT scan and some surgical capabilities. And I believe there's one on the other side, which in the north, and there's Deir al-Balah in the central Gaza. But they are barely functioning. They're bombed. They just get bombed the roof of Al-Aqsa just yesterday, and it happens all the time. You have to stop and think to yourself as a logical person, is this okay to do? If someone else was, for example, Russia was doing this to Ukraine, would we be silent and be quiet about it? No. No. We would call it a war crime. We would label it appropriately, and say that. But when it comes to Israel, there's carte blanche. They have complete impunity to do whatever they want, because they can just say, oh, it's Hamas, or, these are not humans. They're dehumanized Palestinians. And it's just, the world needs to wake up and see this.
No, you're absolutely right. And, I think part of the world outside the United States, I think a good part of the world has woken up and has seen this. Not enough. And it needs to be 100% across the board with everybody. I also see it as a little bit of a generational thing. Like I am incredibly proud of Generation Z for the way they've stood up to this and the way they've called a spade based on everything they see. I mean, Gen Z to me has been incredible. The millennials as well. I think the older generations, from Generation X to the baby boomers, quite frankly, the ones that have just drank the Kool-Aid of political narratives for so long, they need to realize what is happening there. It's just not acceptable. I've used the analogy on Instagram a few times through graphics that said, if there's a school shooter in an elementary school, is it appropriate to drop a bomb on the school and blow up the school and say, hey, there was a shooter in there. There was a school shooter in there. And when
I've
say
used
that,
the same analogy.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
that is unbelievable. That is unbelievable. Let me
Yeah, and
ask
I think a lot of this is, I was just going to mention, is this is that weaponization of this, like being a victim, right? Like Israel has been using this card of we are victims, and it just, like, people need to see through that now, because it's like that rhetoric, it just doesn't work anymore. It's too late to be saying that, and it's getting old.
Yeah,
Frankly, it's
yeah.
just getting old. It's preposterous to keep saying that, and just to use it to do whatever you want to do to the people of Palestine. That's just not okay.
No, it's not okay at all. And, there's been a lot of boisterous people about this. The comedian Dave Smith has done a great job of pointing this out, and he's Jewish. So like, I love it. I honestly, I love it when, first, I love it when anyone stands up for humanity, but I think it hits a little harder when, Jewish people stand up for humanity. And there's a ton of them that do that. Medea Benjamin from Code Pink, she's incredible. She's Jewish. She stands up for it. Unfortunately, the folks in the positions of power in our government. I mean, Bernie Sanders is Jewish, and I will say he has spoken out against Netanyahu, but I don't think he takes it far enough to really, stand up for, what is truly going on. I think he kind of toes it to a certain line and maybe focuses on his angst toward Netanyahu. But, what has taken place, you said it the best when you said it, if Russia had done this in Ukraine, or if any country had done this anywhere else, it's just unacceptable. But for some reason, there's a different standard being applied. Let me ask you this, in terms of the hospital and all that, I guess the medical staff that's local there, were they, first of all, I don't even know how it's functioning anymore. It seems like all of the infrastructure has been taken out. So like the local doctors, are they still treating the patients, or is this all being done by folks like yourself coming in from other countries?
A lot of the staff there are their trainees. The senior staff had been imprisoned or killed, many of them. And so much of the staff that's left are trainees. And if there are senior staff, there's very few that are left. One good example is Dr. Abu Safia from Kamal Adwan Hospital in North Gaza. And he was in prison. He's still imprisoned. There was no reason for him to be in prison. They've never charged him with anything. They abducted him, tortured him. He's still in prison. And there's so many like that have been just taken. And so these are volunteers essentially that have been working day in and day out. If they get paid, it's very little. It's not enough to do anything really. But they've been working and coming back every single day to work. And I saw it myself. I mean, they embody like just the principles of what a healthcare worker should be.
Yeah.
They take their job very seriously and they are very good at their job. But you can only do so much, first of all, when you have no resources, but also when you yourself are constantly threatened under bombs and guns and being starved to death. It's very hard to do your job. I saw many of my colleagues be displaced during evacuation orders when I was there both times. Just imagine, I remember the medical director of the ED at Nasser Hospital. While I was there, he was evacuated, the place he was living, he had to displace and move his entire family like a couple of times. And we're not talking about moving from a house to a house. We're talking about like a tent,
Yeah.
by the sea in sand. I mean, it's impossible. It's impossible. And he's here managing an entire emergency department, like the most busy emergency department. So these are, there's only so much a person can take, and they have been tested to the max and beyond. And so these are healthcare workers that are just completely, I'm so surprised and so shocked that they're functioning and providing medical care with
It's
nothing.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. Let me ask you, rough numbers. Obviously, I know you can't be exact with this, but of the total amount of people that you treated, what percent were women, children versus men?
Yeah, so the UN published a number that over 70% of the casualties are women and children. Myself, when I look at the numbers and I try to look back at all the patients I treated, when I came back in August, for example, when I went in there, my percentages were more like 86% of them were children, small children. We're talking about young children, not ones that can be mistaken as an adult,
Yeah.
like late teens or anything like that, and women. And that's who most of that's who the patient population is. And most of my colleagues, every single one that I've spoken to at least has said the same thing, that these are mostly men, mostly women and children.
That is unbelievable. My God, that is unbelievable. Okay, listen, what else? What else do you want to talk about? What else should we talk about?
I think that there's this this concept of October 7th. I know you've talked about it, a lot on your show, of it being the starting point in all of this. And
Yeah.
it is so untrue. It couldn't be further from the truth, right? We have to take this, it can't be in a vacuum. But the sense that I want to point out is that the apartheid, that this is an apartheid state. And this is so obvious when you go to Gaza. I'll give you an example. People that are in Gaza City, a lot of them have like never been outside of there. So we're
Yeah.
talking, because there's checkpoints for everything. There's checkpoints. There are drones following you. I know a 23-year-old who was a medical student who never knew what it sounded like without a drone overhead. So when you go there, there's a drone that follows you around, that surveys, right? It's a surveillance all the time. And it just follows, or it has a capability of shooting and knowing where you are at all times. It's just this buzzing overhead all the time. Just imagine that. Imagine what it feels like, that you're in a free place, a free state, and there's
Yeah.
something following you around all the time to see what you're doing and what you're up to all the time. Does that seem free to you?
No, there's
Absolutely
definitely
not.
nothing free there. You know what? I'm actually really glad you brought this up. And, I'm actually working on on a specific guide that'll help people understand this. And you're right. Anybody that thinks this started October 7th, 2023 is completely clueless. But the problem is that's what most people think. That's what most Americans, for honestly, most Americans think that. And again, not to their fault, because we've been insulated from all of this. And I'll be honest, I was one of those people. I had no idea. I didn't know any of this. And then through the course of the past 18 months, when you start to understand the 1917 Balfour Declaration, 1948, what actually happened in order for Israel to be founded in 1948, you had to get rid of a bunch of people. And so 700 to 900,000 Palestinians were removed or killed, I think, actually in 1948. 1967, the Six-Day War, and then especially going to 2005, when there's a big narrative around how Israel gave the Palestinians Gaza in 2005 by removing their 8,500 settlers that were there. Well, that left 2 million Palestinians who then have been under this open air prison, which you perfectly just described with the drones, since 2005. I mean, the entire area, there's so much history to it. And October 7th was nothing but another sort of data point in this unbelievable situation. But you're absolutely right about that. And I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. For a while, I thought this two-state solution was the answer, but I now have come to the realization that the two-state solution is just a myth. And I don't think that the Israeli side ever will allow that to happen. I don't even know if the Palestinian people ever want that. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, what do you think?
I mean, I think the most blatant and like the elephant in the room is that the first thing that needs to happen is the bombardment needs to stop, right? We
Yeah.
need to stop arming Israel, because you can't do anything until you stop killing people, like just endlessly. A lot of times people ask, like, I think one of your questions was too, like, what NGOs are actually doing good on the ground. And if we would allow them to, I think many NGOs would do well on the ground. UNRWA is a great example. Defunding them from the US was not a good idea, because UNRWA is the backbone of Gaza, of Palestine. There are people that they're products of UNRWA. They were able to go to school because of UNRWA. They were able to become doctors because of UNRWA. And so it's those type of things, but to not ignore the very basic thing. And this is what I talk about in that small video that I made that you posted earlier, is this is not about religion or politics. And because I say mass starvation of children and shooting children in the head or disproportionately killing children is wrong, that does not equal that I am a Hamas sympathizer or a pro-Hamas or any of those things that people have, they claim that we are because we're saying these things. It's just, those are standalone statements. To say that children should not be targeted, they should not be starved to death, that starvation shouldn't be used as a weapon. Those are standalone statements that nothing comes after that. There is no but Hamas. There is no but October 7th. No.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
nor should you tolerate it, nor should you allow anybody to use that rebuttal, because it doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. And it's just a way of shutting people up, of silencing them. It's a way of using that victimization that I talked about earlier to shut people up.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And the victimization has taken place for so long, and it's a coordinated effort. It's an absolute coordinated media and political effort that unfortunately has been taking place for decades. And it just so happens that in 2023, 2024, and now 2025, it's in the forefront. But I will say, I do see the tide turning. I see the world turning. I really do. I think that what has taken place post October 7th has opened up Pandora's box for the Israeli government. I'll say it directly to the Israeli government. I think it's opened up Pandora's box on them, and it's not closing. I mean, it's not closing. And I think they are absolutely I mean, I hope they regret what they've done and regret kind of opening up this box, but oh my God. All right, listen, I totally appreciate this. I have one ask of you, and that ask is I am working on putting together kind of a debate series similar to, what Pierce Morgan does. And I'd absolutely love to have you back on as part of that. I think that to me, you are the epitome of not only a medical doctor, but you're the epitome of a human being. You're the epitome of what we all should be. And you're somebody that, again, all you're doing is looking at this through an empathetic lens of humanity, especially towards children, women, and men for that matter. And that doesn't make you anti anything. That makes you a hero. Honestly, I mean that. That makes you an absolute hero. And you have done something that such a small percentage of this world is willing to do, and that is take away time from your safety net, your safe existence, your family, and really go and make a difference. So on behalf of anybody with a heart, I truly thank you. I really do.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for having me. I'd be
No
delighted to
problem.
join.
All right, listen, everybody. I hope you got as much out of this as I did. I'm not going to lie. There are a couple of times I'm kind of holding back some emotions, but I will end it by not getting emotional on this. But once again, thank you for everything. Call a spade, and hang on the line. And all right, everybody, we'll talk to you soon.
This episode was brought to you by the new book Deep Shallow Dive Into You, available now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble in hardcover and paperback. Don't forget to sign up for our new mailing list on our website at deepshallowdive.com.